My name is Elena, and if someone had told me that the simple act of stepping into a sauna one summer afternoon would forever alter the course of my life, I wouldn't have believed them. At 38, I had settled into a life of quiet dissatisfaction. Marrying Richard, a wealthy man nearly 20 years my senior, seemed like the practical choice at the time. He was charming, successful, and promised me stability, a sharp contrast to the tumultuous relationships of my youth. But as the years passed, the spark we once shared dimmed, extinguished by his constant business trips and a lack of emotional connection. I was left to wander the sprawling estate, alone in a marriage that felt more like a business arrangement. Then there was Lucas, Richard's son from his first marriage. At 22, Lucas was everything his father wasn't. Youthful, vibrant, and painfully perceptive. He'd moved back home temporarily after graduating college, citing a desire to save money before starting his career. But I suspected there was more to his return than he let on. Lucas had an energy about him that made it impossible to ignore his presence. Whether it was his sharp wit, the easy confidence in his smile, or the way his deep blue eyes seemed to see right through me, he was magnetic. And as much as I tried to maintain the boundaries of our roles, his stepmother, his father's wife, there was an undeniable tension between us, a charge that grew stronger with each passing day. It was one of those oppressively hot summer days when the house felt suffocatingly quiet. Richard was away on yet another trip, leaving Lucas and me alone. I spent the morning trying to distract myself, cleaning rooms that didn't need cleaning, flipping through books I had no interest in reading. By the afternoon, the heat had become unbearable, and I remembered the sauna near the pool house, a part of the estate I rarely used. I slipped into a silk robe over my swimsuit and made my way to the sauna. Inside, the cedar-scented air wrapped around me, and the quiet hum of the heating unit was a soothing balm to my restless thoughts. I let the warmth seep into my skin, leaning back against the bench and closing my eyes. Minutes passed in peaceful solitude until I heard the door slide open. My eyes snapped open to see Lucas stepping inside, a towel wrapped loosely around his hips. "I didn't know anyone else used this thing," he said casually, his lips curling into a faint smirk. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice sharper than intended. "I could ask you the same thing," he replied, leaning against the wooden wall. "I thought you didn't like saunas." "I don't," I admitted. "But today's an exception." He shrugged, settling onto the bench across from me. His presence was overwhelming in the small space, his toned physique and damp hair drawing my attention despite my best efforts to look away. We sat in tense silence, the heat amplifying the unspoken tension between us. Finally, Lucas broke the quiet. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice softer now. I hesitated. "Why do you ask?" "You've seemed off lately," he said. "Like something's bothering you." "It's nothing," I lied, hoping to deflect his concern. "Is it my dad?" he pressed, his tone laced with genuine concern. "You don't have to pretend with me, Elena. I can see it." The honesty in his words caught me off guard. "He's always gone," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes it feels like I don't exist to him anymore." Lucas leaned forward, his expression serious. "You deserve more than that. You deserve to be seen. To be appreciated." His words sent a shiver down my spine, despite the sweltering heat. I looked away, unsure of how to respond. But then I felt his hand on mine, his touch gentle yet grounding. "You're not alone," he said softly. The sauna's heat seemed to intensify, though I knew it wasn't just the temperature. Lucas's hand on mine sent a current through my body, a sensation that was both thrilling and terrifying. I should have pulled away, should have said something to re-establish the boundaries between us. But I didn't. Instead, I looked into his eyes, those piercing blue eyes that had always held a hint of mischief but now carried something deeper, something more vulnerable. It felt as though he could see right through me, past the polished facade I wore as Richard's wife, to the woman I truly was beneath. "Lucas," I whispered, my voice trembling. He leaned closer, his hand still on mine. "You don't have to say anything," he said softly. "I know this is complicated, but I can't ignore how I feel when I'm around you." His words were a confession, one that hung in the charged air between us. My heart raced as I searched for the right response, but nothing came. All I could do was sit there, trapped in the magnetic pull of his gaze. Before I could stop myself, I whispered, "This isn't right." "But it feels right," he countered, his voice steady. "Doesn't it?" I hated how much I agreed with him, how much my body betrayed my mind. The heat in the sauna was nothing compared to the heat coursing through me as he leaned in closer, his face inches from mine. "I see you, Elena," he murmured. "Not as my father's wife, but as the incredible woman you are. And I can't pretend I don't." His words were the final crack in the dam I'd been holding back for so long. Without thinking, I closed the distance between us, my lips brushing against his in a hesitant kiss. It was soft at first, testing the boundaries of what we both knew was forbidden. But as his hand moved to cup my face, the kiss deepened, and all sense of restraint melted away. The sauna's walls seemed to close in, cocooning us in a world where nothing else mattered but this moment. His hands moved to my waist, pulling me closer, and I let myself get lost in the intensity of it all. For the first time in years, I felt alive, desired, wanted, seen. The heat of the sauna blended seamlessly with the warmth radiating from Lucas's touch. It was intoxicating, overwhelming in a way I hadn't expected. My breath hitched as his fingers brushed against the fabric of my robe, hesitant yet purposeful, as though seeking permission. I didn't stop him. I couldn't. Every rational thought dissolved under the weight of the connection building between us. His lips moved softly against mine, testing, tasting, as though this moment was as surreal for him as it was for me. I felt his breath on my cheek, warm and unsteady, mirroring the racing rhythm of my heart. His hand slid to the small of my back, pressing me closer, erasing the space between us. "Lucas," I murmured, my voice barely audible, trembling with emotion. He pulled back slightly, just enough to look at me, his blue eyes searching mine for any sign of hesitation. "Tell me to stop," he whispered, his voice low, rough with restrained desire. I couldn't. My body betrayed me, leaning into him, seeking the comfort and fire he offered. My hands found their way to his chest, tracing the lines of his lean frame, memorizing the feel of him. I had spent so long denying myself, living a life that felt empty and routine. And here he was, shaking me awake with every touch, every whispered breath. "Don't stop," I finally admitted, the words escaping before I could reconsider. That was all he needed. His lips returned to mine, more insistent this time, the hesitation replaced by certainty. The kiss deepened, each movement a declaration of the emotions we had both been suppressing for so long. His hands roamed my back, his touch igniting trails of fire along my skin, even through the thin fabric of my robe. The heat of the sauna, combined with the heat of our connection, was overwhelming. Beads of sweat formed on my brow, but I didn't care. The world outside the wooden walls of the sauna no longer existed. There were no roles, no rules, just us. His hands found the knot of my robe, fingers hesitating for a brief moment before pulling it loose. The fabric slipped from my shoulders, pooling at my feet. The vulnerability of the moment struck me, but instead of fear, I felt liberated. Lucas's gaze didn't waver, his admiration evident as his eyes roamed over me. "You're incredible," he said, his voice husky, filled with awe. I reached up, pulling him into another kiss, desperate to feel more of him, to drown in the emotions I had kept locked away. His touch became bolder, his hands exploring every inch of me with reverence and hunger. Time seemed to stand still as we lost ourselves in each other, the outside world forgotten. For once, I allowed myself to live in the moment, to feel without fear or judgment. Lucas's lips moved from my mouth to my neck, his kisses trailing a path that left me breathless. The sound of the sauna door creaking brought us both back to reality. We froze, our breaths mingling as we listened intently. After a moment of silence, it was clear no one was there, but the interruption was a reminder of the delicate line we were walking. "We should," I began, but Lucas silenced me with a finger to my lips. "No regrets, Elena," he said firmly, his voice a mixture of conviction and tenderness. And as I looked into his eyes, I realized I didn't regret a single thing. Not the kiss, not the touch, not the emotions we had unleashed. For once, I had allowed myself to feel alive, and that was something I couldn't take back. But even as we gathered ourselves, the weight of what had just transpired lingered. This moment of passion had opened a door we couldn't close, and the consequences of stepping through it were yet to be faced. The silence between us as we left the sauna was deafening, yet it spoke volumes. The tension in the air was palpable, not from awkwardness but from the weight of what had just happened. Lucas walked beside me, his hand brushing against mine occasionally, as though unsure whether to reach for it or keep his distance. Back in the house, the world outside resumed its hum, as if nothing monumental had just unfolded. But inside, every glance, every subtle movement, carried a charged energy. I excused myself under the pretense of needing to check my phone, retreating to the privacy of my bedroom. Closing the door behind me, I leaned against it, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My mind raced, replaying every moment in the sauna, the way Lucas had looked at me, the intensity of his touch, the fire ignited within me that refused to be extinguished. How had it come to this? My stepson, so much younger, yet he had awakened something in me that I thought was long dead. Guilt began to creep in, gnawing at the edges of my euphoria. This wasn't just complicated, it was dangerous. A soft knock at the door startled me. "Elena." Lucas's voice was low, hesitant. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob before I opened it. He stood there, his hair slightly tousled, his expression a mixture of concern and longing. "Are you okay?" he asked, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I nodded, though I wasn't entirely sure it was true. I just needed a moment to think. He stepped closer, his presence filling the room. "About us?" His question hung in the air, and I couldn't avoid it. "Lucas, what happened? It was real," he interrupted, his voice firm. "It wasn't just a moment, Elena. You felt it too. I couldn't deny it. The passion, the connection, it was undeniable. But that didn't make it right. We have to be careful," I said, my voice trembling. "Your father." "My father doesn't see you," Lucas said sharply, cutting me off. He's so wrapped up in his work, his life outside this house. You deserve more than being an afterthought, Elena." His words hit a nerve. The loneliness I had felt for years bubbled to the surface, and I found myself stepping closer to him, my hand reaching for his instinctively. "Lucas," I whispered, my voice barely audible. His hands gently cupped my face, his touch tender. "I don't care about what's right or wrong," he said, his eyes locking onto mine. "I care about you." Before I could respond, his lips found mine again, and the room seemed to tilt. This kiss was different, deeper, more desperate, as though we both understood the fleeting nature of what we had. I broke away breathless, my hands resting on his chest. "This can't be our reality, Lucas," I said, my voice shaking. "We have to be careful." He nodded, but his eyes betrayed him, filled with determination. "I'm not letting this end, Elena. I can't." The days that followed were a whirlwind of stolen moments and whispered confessions. We navigated the thin line between secrecy and discovery, careful not to raise suspicion. Lucas found reasons to linger around the house, offering to help me with chores or inventing excuses to spend time together. Each encounter was charged with tension, our touches lingering longer than necessary, our gazes filled with unspoken words. The intensity grew, and with it the risk. One evening, as I prepared dinner, Lucas walked into the kitchen. He stood behind me, his presence overwhelming. His hands found my waist, and he leaned in close, his breath warm against my neck. "Can I help with anything?" he asked, his voice teasing. I turned to face him, my heart racing. "Lucas, we can't keep doing this," I said, though my resolve was weakening. He smirked, his confidence unnerving. "Then tell me to leave, Elena. Tell me you don't feel the same way, and I'll walk away." I couldn't point one night, the inevitable happened. A text message from Lucas's father popped up on my phone, a simple, "Working late again tonight. Don't wait up." I sat on the couch, staring at the message, the weight of my choices pressing down on me. Lucas entered the room, his expression softening when he saw my troubled face. "He's not coming home, is he?" Lucas asked, sitting beside me. I shook my head, unable to speak. He reached for my hand, his touch grounding me. "You don't have to do this alone, Elena," he said. The vulnerability in his voice shattered the last of my defenses. I turned to him, my emotions spilling over. "What are we doing, Lucas? How can this ever work?" He didn't answer with words. Instead, he pulled me into his arms, holding me as I let the tears fall. It happened on a quiet evening, one that felt deceptively safe. Lucas and I were sitting in the living room, the air between us charged with an intimacy that had grown over time. I had lit a few candles, their soft glow giving the space a warmth that felt almost too perfect. Lucas sat beside me on the couch, his hand resting lightly on my knee. It wasn't overt, but the gesture spoke volumes, a silent reassurance of his feelings. We were talking, about nothing really. Mundane topics like his university assignments, the weather, and plans for the weekend. But the way he looked at me, his gaze lingering just a second too long, made even the most trivial conversation feel profound. Then, the front door opened. At first, it didn't register. The sound was so unexpected that my mind didn't immediately connect it to its source. But when I saw Lucas's father, Mark, step through the doorway, his coat slung over his arm, time seemed to stop. Mark froze in the entryway, his eyes narrowing as they scanned the scene before him. His gaze fell on Lucas first, who was sitting far too close to me for comfort. Then his eyes shifted to me, his expression darkening as he took in the candles, the wine glasses on the coffee table, and the undeniable intimacy in the room. "What's going on here?" Mark's voice was cold, sharp enough to cut through the tension. Lucas stiffened beside me, his hand slipping from my knee as though burned. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding in my chest. "Mark, I didn't think you'd be home so early," I said, my voice shaky, betraying my guilt. "That much is clear," Mark replied, his tone laced with suspicion. His eyes flicked between us, searching for answers in our faces. "It's not what it looks like," Lucas said, standing as well. But his words sounded hollow, unconvincing even to me. Mark's expression darkened further, and his voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Then why don't you tell me what it is, Lucas? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like something's going on between my wife and my son." The words hung in the air, heavy with accusation. "Mark, please," I started, but he cut me off. "Don't," he snapped, his anger finally breaking through the icy exterior. "Don't lie to me, Elena. I'm not an idiot." Lucas stepped forward, his jaw set in defiance. "You're right. Something is going on." My breath caught in my throat. I turned to Lucas, my eyes wide with disbelief. "Lucas, no," I whispered, but it was too late. Mark's face turned red with fury. "You little," he took a step toward Lucas, but I quickly moved between them, my hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Stop. Both of you, just stop," I shouted, my voice trembling. "This is my fault. All of it. Don't blame Lucas for this." Mark glared at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of betrayal and disbelief. "You're damn right it's your fault," he spat. "I trusted you, Elena. I brought you into this house, made you a part of this family, and this is how you repay me." Tears welled up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "You've been absent, Mark," I said, my voice breaking. "You've been so consumed with work, with everything outside this house, that I felt invisible for years. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but don't pretend you're blameless in this." Mark looked like I had slapped him. He opened his mouth to respond but closed it again, seemingly at a loss for words. Lucas reached for my hand, his touch grounding me. "Don't talk to her like that," he said, his voice firm. "You've ignored her, treated her like a piece of furniture. She deserves better." Mark turned on Lucas, his anger renewed. "And you think you're better? You think you can step in and play the hero?" The argument escalated, voices rising, accusations flying. I stood between them, my heart breaking as the two people I cared about the most tore into each other. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "This is over. All of it." Both men fell silent, their eyes on me. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "This family is broken, and it's my fault. I can't stay here and make it worse." Lucas looked stricken, his hand reaching for mine again. "Elena, don't." "I have to," I said firmly, pulling away from him. "This isn't right, Lucas. It never was." Mark said nothing, his face a mask of anger and hurt. I turned and walked toward the bedroom, my heart heavy with the weight of my decision. As I packed my things, tears streamed down my face, but I knew it was the only way. When I left the house that night, I didn't look back. I moved to a small apartment on the other side of town, starting over in a life that felt both liberating and unbearably lonely. Lucas tried to contact me, sending messages and leaving voicemails, but I didn't respond. Mark filed for divorce shortly after, citing irreconcilable differences. Lucas and his father barely spoke, the rift between them seemingly irreparable. I thought about Lucas often, about what we had shared and the cost of our actions. It was a bittersweet memory, one that would always haunt me. Some choices leave scars that never fully heal, but they also teach us who we are. In the end, I had to let go of Lucas. Not because I didn't love him, but because loving him had nearly destroyed us both.